While moves such as Earthquake have been the same from the very beginning, there are some moves that have changed over time, and some of these changes are drastic. Today we're going over 10 moves whose buffs were so strong, their effects were so impactful that they wound up changing the game. And since we've got plenty of moves to cover, we're gonna jump right in with quite possibly the biggest damage buff on this list, Leech Life. Leech Life is a cousin to Giga Drain and Drain Punch. Those moves had some humble beginnings, but nothing compared to the desolation Leech Life withstood for the first 6 generations of Pokemon. It was best known for being an essential part of the moveset of in-game Zubats that you ran into in caves, alongside other staples in Supersonic and Poison Sting. You thought Giga Drain was weak? Well, Leech Life made even its true weakling predecessor, Mega Drain, look like the stuff of Ubers. 20 base power? What is this weaker than Tackle junk? It's on par with early Knockoff and Rapid Spin, except those moves were valuable for their utility. Leech Life offered bug-type damage that even with Stab would struggle to hurt the quadruple weak Malamar. And yeah, technically it also healed the user based on the damage it did, though given how unbelievably pathetic Leech Life's damage output was, it's questionable if this ever actually happened. Then Gen 7 comes around and mercifully buffs the daylights out of it. Leech Life went all the way up to 80 base power, out-damaging even Giga Drain and Drain Punch. It was just as strong as X-Scissor, but with an excellent side effect. It was a solid option on Sub-Toxic Araquanid in Gen 7, the healing allowing it to create more substitutes, but Leech Life really took off with the development of Choice Band Buzzwole in Generation 8. Buzzwole was the obvious candidate for the move in Gen 7, but none of its movesets wound up actually needing it. Once Choice Band Buzzwole was discovered though, Leech Life took off. Choice Band Buzzwole loved Leech Life. Not only did it love the psychic shredding coverage alongside its other stab close combat, it also loved how Leech Life reinforced its own excellent physical bulk through its added power. What an underdog story. Leech Life brought the magic to Buzzwole just like our next move on this list, Magic Coat. But before we talk about Magic Coat, our sponsor is a game changer in mobile gaming because this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is the biggest mobile RPG for a reason. The amount of content they have is simply endless, from the campaign to the dungeons to the raid bosses. It's also insane how good the graphics look for a mobile game, but my favorite part about Raid is of course the character selection. Some of my favorite characters in fiction are characters from legends or famous stories. I love that Raid just has these characters in their game, like Sun Wukong and even Loki and Freya from Norse mythology. And speaking of characters from famous stories, their next expansion features 5 brand new legendary champions from the classic tale of Alice in Wonderland. They are releasing Alice the Wanderer, Cheshire Cat, Mad Hatter, Knave of Hearts, and of course the Queen of Hearts. All of these legendary champions are so powerful, but also hard to acquire in-game. I wish I had legendary champions when I started. But fear not, you can actually start with a legendary champion. New players can use the promo code GETALICE to receive Alice the Wanderer after downloading the game via my link. But wait, there's more. You'll also receive a huge starter pack that includes an epic champion Tagoar from the Orc faction and another starter pack that includes Fayne once you reach level 15. So if you want all this free stuff in the biggest mobile RPG and also support the channel to help us produce more content, download the game with my custom link in the description or scan my QR code and start raiding today. And of course, you can find me under the name Kellen_FSG and join my clan False Swipe Gaming with the clan tag FSG7, and I'll see you on the battlefield. In Gens 3 and 4, Magic Coat was thoroughly a mediocre move. It only bounced back literal status moves like Toxic and Thunder Wave, and as helpfully pointed out by the Fire Red and Leaf Green Pokedex entry, Leech Seed as well. In Gen 5 though, mirroring the new ability Magic Bounce, which was originally translated as Magic Mirror, Magic Coat took a much more powerful form. Now it bounces back every single non-damaging move aimed at the Magic Bounce user. This has extraordinary reach. Most famously, it bounces back entry hazards. Nothing quite like making your opponent set Stealth Rock up against themselves. That's just the beginning too. It bounces back Taunt, thereby preventing the opponent from taunting you afterwards. It bounces back phasing moves, and yes, status. The hazards and Taunt are the biggest of these though. It has made Magic Coat a staple on lead Pokemon looking to set the tempo early. Pokemon like Azov had a messy enough job maneuvering the lead metagame before, but now there are all sorts of ways to trip up even faster Pokemon. And oh boy, Deoxys Wars, now those are ugly. If you have 2 two Deoxys against each other, it is indeed the optimal play to exhaust each other a Magic Coat PP before going for the taunt speed tie. What a risk, but what's Pokemon without a bit of that? Though sometimes it can feel like a kick in the shins when that risk doesn't pay off, just like our next move, Low Kick. Here we have a move whose buffs greatly affected VGC, far more than singles actually, which is quite a rarity. Of course, Low Kick is quite a decent move in singles as well. Most notably, it was used by Mega Mewtwo X to great effect in Ubers. It didn't have close combat, but it worked out just fine since Ubers is full of heavy Pokemon, and that's exactly why it works so well in VGC. Its origins were incredibly humble though. In Gen 1, Low Kick didn't have its weight-based power. It was a flat 50 BP with a 30% chance to flinch. Machamp could use it if you were feeling lucky, and if you were using Gen 1 Machamp, you needed all the luck you could get. Sad though it was that it now couldn't 2-hit KO Snorlax and Tauros. Machamp then gained Cross Chop in Gen 2, leaving Low Kick, which maintained its Gen 1 mechanics, in even greater obscurity. It wasn't until Gen 3 that Low Kick adopted the form it remains in today, where its power is based on the opponent's weight. It went as follows: if the target weighed less than 10 kilograms, Low Kick was 20 base power, less than 25 kilograms, 40 base power, less than 50 kilograms, 60 base power, less than 100 kilograms, 80 base power, less than 200 kilograms, 100 base power, and 200 or more kilograms is 120 base power. That's right, Low Kick adopted the most frightening thing in the world, the metric system. Well, for American players anyway. Now, of course, this new structure came with the risk that you would have a fighting move unable to threaten certain targets because they were too lightweight, but the upsides were well worth it, considering that it had the potential to become a close combat without the defense drops, and far more PP for that matter. And even if it didn't quite hit that maxed out level, it was still hitting most other targets on par with moves like Earthquake and Shadow Ball. In singles, it was decent, if unspectacular. Pre-Mega Mewtwo X, it was mostly relegated to coverage for the likes of Weavile and Ambipom, as well as a close combat alternative to defensive fighters who didn't want the bulk drops like Hitmontop. In VGC though, it was a major part of restricted formats, generation after generation, turning the colossal heft of those big legendaries like Groudon and Kyogre against them through Low Kick's max power. In 2010, world champion Ray Rizzle ran Hariyama, and its stab Low Kick was enormous enough for what was effectively drawback less close combat spam into the monstrously popular Dialga. In 2016, Barry Anderson and Jamie Boyd used Scrafty to reach 8th and 13th respectively, and both of them were rocking Low Kick. Not only did it have max power against the Primals, it was a superb, super effective move into Mega Kangaskhan. It didn't quite have close combat strength against it, but it still smacked Mega Kangaskhan for excellent 100 base power, and again didn't come with the debilitating defense drops. Mega Kangaskhan also loves spamming Low Kick herself on sets without power-up punch, forming superb complementary coverage to its normal stab alongside Sucker Punch. Finally, in Gen 9's restricted format, Regulation G and I, Iron Hands follows in Hariyama's Low Kicking footsteps, and we could go on, as there are so many users of Low Kick in VGC. Heck, in Gen 7, even Incineroar occasionally incorporated the move into its moveset for Sakataka, which goes to show how excellent it is. A seemingly unamusing yet magma hot buff, just like our next move, Magma Storm. Now, Magma Storm might not seem like it got buffed at first, maybe it wasn't nerfed in the truest sense of the word either, but a surface glance might make calling what it got a buff raise an eyebrow. In Gens 4 and 5, Magma Storm was 120 base power, the same as Fire Blast was before being nerfed to 110 in Gen 6, the same gen which knocked Magma Storm down even further, all the way down to 100 base power. This is hardly weak, but what gives for such a massive drop in power? Well, Magma Storm was also actually buffed twice. In Gen 4, it was 70% accurate, and as good as a Trapper Heatran was, man did that accuracy sting sometimes. Focus Blast accuracy? As stab? Yeesh. In Gen 5, it was brought up to the serviceable 75% it remains at today. Not amazing, but definitely an improvement. That's not the buff that put Magma Storm on this list though. In Gens 4 and 5, Magma Storm's trapping damage was 6.25% per turn, which is of course good. It's the same as sand damage or burn damage in Gens 1, 7, 8, and 9. And yes, Magma could and often did stack beautifully along these other forms of passive damage, making it really irritating, especially since Magma's trapping effect meant that even if Heatran switched out and the Magma wore off, you'd have to stay in for another round of the other damage, and you probably took Stealth Rock switching in too at least. It's at this point we must say that in Gen 6, they almost had to knock Magma Storm down as much as they did base power wise, because it would have become pretty absurd given the other change it received. Now its trapping damage was doubled, clocking in at 12.5% per turn. This is huge. While the base power drop was of course far from negligible, as when you use Magma Storm over Fire Blast, you're doing so partially for the trap against certain targets, Obviously in Gen 4 it was most famously Blissey, while in Gens 5 it paired with Sunny Day and Solar Beam to ruin Politoed. But in many cases, the Pokemon switching into Heatran isn't something you're going to stay in and try to fight it out against. Think something like Garchomp. Now even in this situation, you're still using Magma Storm on the switch because it's a safe use of your stab. You know the target has to stay in, and thus you won't risk a double switch, and most of all, the trap damage is very nice. It's basically a power boost, especially if you also run Protect, as so many Magmatran variants do. So here's the thing, in terms of base power, whether or not you Fire Blast or Magma Storm into Garchomp or whatever Pokemon you're going to eventually switch out of is, in a broad sense, not going to make much of a difference. The chip damage though, that is enormous. The flat 12.5% is amazing for two reasons. Number one, it doesn't care how bulky or resistant that target is. It's always going to do that much damage. Think of it like Kyogre being as affected by Stealth Rock as Politoed. Sure, Kyogre takes Fire Blast a lot better than Toad, but it gets worn down by rocks just the same. With this in mind, you could run Magma Storm into the quad fire resistant Kingdra under Rain, and it would still irritate it with Magma Storm's chip damage, especially if you're running Protect, as you so often are. This brings us to reason number 2 why 12.5% is a lot. It's a neutral Stealth Rock hit. It's how much health Gliscor gets from Poison Heal. It means you're out damaging leftovers. It means that in conjunction with other forms of chip damage, the opponent is getting worn down uncomfortably fast, especially when you consider that Protect is going to turn that 12.5% into 25%. Spamming your stab with a guarantee of 25% damage on the opponent, this made Heatran into one of the most obnoxious Pokemon in the game, even more so rather. And for a long time in Gen 7, several top players considered it broken. We shudder to imagine how brutal it'd be to face with the added trap damage if it kept its original 120 base power, or even if it had been knocked down to the Fire Blast equivalent 110. And speaking of incredible base power, our next move on this list has a lot of that with Future Sight. Future Sight is the future part of Future Port, which is the renowned combination of Future Sight and Teleport that the Slow Twins wielded to such defining heights in Gen 8 OU. Between Teleport's negative priority location shifting and seeing the future, what is this, Twin Peaks? Anyway, Future Sight's delayed hit works beautifully in tandem with Teleport's selective switch. You bring in a big hitter that threatens Psychic Resist, let's say Weavile or Choice Band Tyranitar, which lethally threatens Psychics and hits Steels well, while the Fighting Resist to their Dark Stab cannot switch in for fear of Psychic Obliteration. As such, the opponent is forced to withstand both the big hitter and the 120 base power stab Psychic move simultaneously. No matter how bulky you are, that's still a tall task most Pokemon won't be able to stand up to. It works beautifully in tandem with the Slow Twins' teleport antics, since their bulk and regenerator means they can withstand a hit to safely teleport after they've used Future Sight on your initial switch without having to slow down later. And indeed, Future Port, or really just Future Sight, was a source of controversy for some time for how genuinely impossible it made switching into certain Pokemon, most famously Urshifu's Single Strike. Hilarious though the idea of a Future Sight ban might seem, it was genuinely tossed around for a bit early into the Crown Tundra metagame. Future Sight wasn't exclusively relegated to use alongside Teleport though. Galarian's Slowking didn't have Teleport, and it was an exceptional user of the move, not least because its Future Sights were coming off of a high base special attack than that of the Cantonian Slow Twins. It went beyond the slow line too. Tapu Lele set up some exceptional combinations with it thanks to its incredible special attack and the fact that the Future Sight would often connect while under the psychic terrain it's summoned, though it could still hit incredibly hard should the terrain expire before the hit. But in most cases, it was terrain boosted, since Tapu Lele would switch in and use the move immediately. It meant that even its Choice Scarf set was incredibly useful against bulky teams, which was major considering how many Scarfers tend to be dead weight when not facing offense. You might be thinking, why did it take until Gen 8 for Future Sight to get spammed like this? I remember Sabrina's Alakazam using this move on me in Pokemon Silver. Was she just that far ahead of the curve? Well, the answer is yes, because Sabrina is awesome. But no, because Future Sight didn't always work the way it does now, which is why it's on this list. It got buffed quite a bit. In Gen 2, it started out doing typeless damage. On one hand, it can't be resisted, but on the other hand, it doesn't hit anything super effectively, and even more crucially, doesn't get stabbed, which is disappointing given the move's measly 80 base power. It wasn't until Gen 5 that Future Sight got buffed to deal psychic damage there, and it was also buffed to a solid 100 base power and even made it 100% accurate as opposed to its previous 90%. Then just a generation later, Gen 6 pushed it to 120 base power that we know today. A small handful of players experimented with it early, but it never caught on, save for some Slowking sets in RU. Why was it not used more in Gens 5, 6, and 7? Well, in Gen 7, Tapu Lele didn't get it, but why not Slowbro in those 3 gens, especially the latter 2? Your guess is as good as ours. Sometimes things just go overlooked for a while, and it can take a strategy being used in a later gen to inspire a player base to go back and re-examine its place in the earlier one. And speaking of early gen moves, our next move on this list is Giga Drain and Drain Punch. Giga Drain was used in Gens 2 and 3 out of a lack of a better grass type option. In Gen 2, Hidden Power Grass absolutely ruined your IVs, then called DVs. Then in Gen 3, when Hidden Power didn't do that anymore, Hidden Power Grass was indeed preferred in many cases. But what about when you needed the coverage of Hidden Power Fire? Well, you just had to grin and bear it. Fortunately, Gen 2 Executor and Gen 3 Celebi were excellent Pokemon who made it work, but it's undeniable that they were really fighting uphill. At least it was an upgrade over Gen 1's paltry 40 base power Mega Drain. But it is a mystery as to who at Game Freak thought Giga Drain and its whopping 60 base power would be so overpowered as to only need 8 PP. When Gen 4 came around and introduced many better grass options, Giga Drain completely disappeared. Its only occasional appearance being from players who had come from a newer gen and didn't know of its previous status. For the same reason, though Drain Punch debuted in Gen 4, it wasn't used at all. It's a shame because it would have been a superb choice on several Breloom sets. Now in Gen 5, these moves sadly did not combine to form Giga Drain Punch, which is Breloom's new dual type signature move, but they did get buffed, and they became significant parts of the metagame. They were buffed to a solid 75 base power, nothing earth-shattering, but excellent for the bulkier Pokemon that these moves were meant for. And just as crucially, they had their power points doubled to 16. 8 is fine for fast-paced Pokemon spamming Fire Blast and Hydro Pump, but if you got a slower, bulkier playstyle of Giga Drain and Drain Punch, you're not trying to win fast, and so you can't be low on PP after a single use of the move. With these buffs, Giga Drain and Drain Punch were able to actually function as the attacking leech seeds that they wanted to be, especially since they were often compounded by boosts, most notably on Nasty Plot Celebi and bulk up Conkeldurr and Breloom. In fact, this is what led their sweeping potential to sometimes spiral out of control. With many other boosters, even bulky ones like Combine Clefable, sometimes the game plan is just to hit them repeatedly until they fall over. Something like Plot Celebi though was unique in that it could quite easily stifle the strategy, since depending on what you tried to hit it with, you risked eating a big boosted Giga Drain that healed it up as it KO'd you, leaving it to take on your follow-up Pokemon. This made Celebi ascend heights just like our next move, High Jump Kick. High Jump Kick has been around since Generation 1 and has gone through many iterations. In Gen 1, it has an 85 base power with 90% accuracy, and if it misses or thuds into a ghost type, it takes 1 HP of crash damage, which as far as drawbacks go, is nearly non-existent. Shame it was exclusively seen on the useless Hitmonlee. Gen 2, same power, but now the crash damage is 1/8 of the damage that the target would have taken. Okay, that's still really good. Hitmonlee used the move to good effect in NU. Gen 3 is where the crash damage starts getting nasty. It's now half the damage the target would have taken, but still it's a solid, more powerful alternative to Brick Break on Bandit Hitmonlee and UU. In OU though, Metachan prefers the safety of Brick Break. It's got enough holding it back without having to worry about missing, and its pure power meant it's not left wanting for strength. High Jump Kick now takes damage equal to half of the target's max HP if it's immune, but on the bright side, it's 100 base power. This makes it a worthwhile enough upgrade for Metachan to take the risk when used in NU. In Gen 5, Game Freak decided enough messing around. We're going all out on the risk reward here. Now, if High Jump Kick is thwarted, be it accuracy, ghost, or protect, the user loses 50% HP. This is of course a huge risk. On the bright side, holy Arceus, look at that strength. 130 base power? This outdoes even close combat. It's absolutely worth the downsides. Blaziken wielded the move en route to shattering OU and becoming the first starter to get banned. Mean Shao was a superb user of the move in both UU and OU with excellent abilities, as Regenerator meant it could heal off a potential crash and allowed it to power the kicks up further with Life Orb, while Reckless went all in and rocketed High Jump Kick's power to nosebleed heights. Even Dragon Dance Scrafty and its unimpressive attack stat became quite threatening thanks to High Jump Kick's immense power. Then in Gen 6 and 7, Mega Medichamp's High Jump Kicks became a defining stunner of an auto-delete button in a game that seemed to have no shortage of them. But even by the high standards of Mega Power, Mega Medicham was stupefying. Mega Lopunny was no slouch in the power department either, and its kicks were coming off of an incredible speed stat. Yeah, they had their share of blood-boiling misses, and playing around Protect could be incredibly obnoxious when facing Pokemon like Heatran and Ferrothorn that they should be destroying handily, but the power was well and truly worth it. Just like our next immensely powerful move on this list, Outrage. Outrage wasn't always this strong though. In Gen 2 and 3, we got baited by what we thought was an actual Dragon Stab move that wasn't Dragon Rage. Well, would you look at that, real Dragon Stab, oh, never mind, it's worthless. It was familiar in the sense that it still locked the user in for 2 to 3 turns and confused you when you were done, but it was a mere 90 base power. Now, that may sound like the worst thing ever, but guess what? Nothing was going to make such a commitment for such unimpressive damage. At least in Gen 3, there was Dragon Claw. It wasn't until Gen 4 that it was boosted to the close combat tier 120 base power, helping launch Dragon as the dominant offensive type of the next 2 generations, and prompting Game Freak to create the Fairy type in Gen 6. It also helped that Outrage's buff came in the same generation as the physical special split. Previously, Salamence had to Dragon Claw off of its special attack set, so its Dragon Dance sets went without Dragon Stab, but once it received Outrage and Platinum, it became the scariest thing around. Diamond and Pro had already seen the full brunt of boosted stab Outrage in the form of the overpowered Swords Dance Guard Shot. Yes, locking into the move is still not the most desirable thing in the world, and a big part of playing around Outrage does indeed involve forcing the opponent to use it so you can throw a steal at the problem for the revenge kill, but the power was just such an incredible upgrade over Dragon Claw that in most cases it was no-brainer, unless you think the horribly inaccurate Dragon Rush is a reasonable middle ground, potential Cynthia cosplay aside. Gen 5 really upped the ante with its new Outrage spammers though. In Black and White 1, it was Haxorus, whose base 147 attack already outraged the player base. Then Black and White 2 came around, Kyurem Black and its base 170 attack arrived, and everyone just about had a conniption. KB would face a Jirachi and use Outrage, as it was indeed the best move. The beautiful part about Outrage's spammability was that, as punishing as the lock could be, it had the same power over consecutive turns as opposed to its initially stronger special counterpart, Draco Meteor. Even with the introduction of Fairy types, Outrage's power and coverage is too good to pass up, and is one of the biggest move buffs on this list, going from useless to spammed everywhere. And speaking of uselessness, we've spoken of Teleport's uselessness competitively before, but to quickly recap, in the first 7 generations, it did literally nothing in trainer battles, and couldn't even be spammed as long as Splash in an attempt to stall your opponent out. Now, it did allow you to flee from wild battles in-game, because just clicking run was too strenuous apparently, but incidentally, this mechanic is what made Abra such a pain to catch, since it literally only had Teleport in its moveset. However, in Gen 8, Game Freak finally made the connection. Hey, you know how when you teleport away from a wild battle, it's kind of like switching out? What if Teleport could switch you out in a trainer battle, like a move that switches? Perhaps sheepish that it had taken them so long to make this connection multiple generations after the introduction of U-Turn, Game Freak decided to up the ante. Teleport wouldn't just be a dry switch move, just like a statless baton pass. It would also have negative priority, meaning the Teleport user would go second. Now that might sound weird, given how important going first so often is, but there are several crucial situations where going second is actually optimal, with many of them actually revolving around the use of switch moves. For instance, the slow Volt switch of Gen 5 Fortress, and Teleport took this concept to its logical endpoint. The transformation was complete. Before, it was to the Pokemon Center. Now it was to the teammate, and it was thematically fitting because the negative priority of the switch allowed your teammate to come in without taking damage from the opposing Pokemon, which was exactly why Teleport became one of the best, most spammed moves in the game. Despite its iconic status as part of Abra's initial moveset, it was not the frail Alakazam which would use this move. No, Teleport took off as a fixture of bulky Pokemon that were already among the best in the game, whose ability to now provide their teammates with safe switches launched their utility into the stratosphere. You take these Pokemon that used to take hits and give them a mechanism to directly translate their hit-taking ability into an opportunity to get their fast teammates on the field safely. Not to get emotional, but this is well and truly insane, folks. This most obviously is a boon for glass cannons, but really anything loves being gifted such a safe, easy switch. At first, Pokemon were doing better than hitting the field safely. They were actually winding up with more health than they started, since the Teleporter was the ultra-sturdy Wish Clefable. Boy, did people hate that period of Gen 8 OU, but that was just the beginning. The Teleporter then became Jason Statham, because that sounds like something he would do, and actually split into 2 Pokemon that were practically the same but also different. Persona style, Slowbro and Slowking. They didn't pass their teammates' wishes, but what they did do was get them on the field over and over and over, and in many cases, the only thing stopping them from doing so in perpetuity was the fact that they could run out of Teleport PP. Yes, actually. Wishport Clefable was cool and all, but if it took a hit, it'd have to actively focus on healing itself. With Regenerator, the Slow Twins could take a hit and heal a good chunk, if not all of it, simply by switching out, or rather, teleporting out. They literally healed by getting their teammates in safely. This made them incredible at being able to then get their teammates in safely as many times as Teleport PP would allow. Of Of course, their teammates also often use switch moves, and the chain of these switch moves also went on in a phenomenon referred to by the player base as the Vortex, especially since this was all taking place in the generation where heavy-duty boots were introduced, meaning all this free-wheeling switch move spam was going on largely unencumbered by hazards. In many instances, for a lack of a better response, the slow twins would face off, hoping to lose the speed tie so they could get the second teleport off. Gen 8 revolved in large part around teleport spam, specifically the slow twins' brand of future port as discussed earlier. Alright, that's it, right? We found by far the most spammed move after receiving a buff. What could possibly top teleport? Oh, knock it off. Stop asking me these rhetorical questions, you say. We know what's next. In Gens 3 to 5, knockoff's item removal was recognized as useful, of course, but it wasn't considered an elite, spammable move that should be considered for as many movesets as possible until its buff in Gen 6. Upon seeing just how powerful item removal was, even when knockoff wasn't doing any actual damage, players reconsidered and the move took off. Initially though, knockoff was pure utility. It did damage, which was great because it meant it couldn't be taunted, but we're talking pre-Gen 8 rapid spin level damage, 20 base power. That was fine, of course. The item removal was all you needed, but also Gen 6 dared to ask, what if this move could also be an incredible offensive attack? Game Freak have rarely considered themselves with questions of excess, but doing this in the same generation where Dark ceased to be resisted by steel may have been a bit much. The player base responded enthusiastically. Yes, this move is now one of the most important in the game. Knockoff's new base power was 65, which isn't that great until you realize that should it hit an opponent holding an item, it gains a 50% boost. This rocketed it up to 97.5 base power, a boost of more than 30, which leaves Crunch in the dust. And it guarantees that, barring the incredibly rare sticky hold ability, the target will not be gaining leftovers recovery, which is well worth the price of the attack becoming weaker afterward. It also generally punishes resist no matter how weak the actual hit is, as if it's not lefties, it's a choice item, or heavy duty boots, or literally anything that isn't a Megastone Z Crystal or transformation item like Giratina Origin's Grisius Orb. This impact cannot be overstated enough in a game where a Pokemon's value is often almost entirely tied to its item, and so must run from knockoff almost like it would run from a KO move. This is especially brutal given how certain dark type threats like Bisharp are. Not only do you have to answer them, you have to answer them and contend with losing your item. It's one reason why Gliscor, post-Toxic Orb activation, was so important defensively, but even Gliscor can't counter every user of knockoff. Have fun trying to switch it into Bandit Crawdon, which was so frightening for some stall teams that itemless Amoonguss made an appearance, just so it wouldn't take the initial big hit from knockoff. Anti-knockoff generally wasn't that extreme, but it did prompt a lot of Cobra Berries on psychic types. Knockoff was also another of the rare moves whose buff made a major splash in VGC. It went from non-existent pre-Gen 6 to a staple in Gen 6 and on. The huge initial hit is critical in such fast-paced games, and the fact that it comes with item removal just makes it even more superb. If something had knockoff and good physical attack, it was almost surely going to use the move, especially if it was stab. Its impact was just so wide-reaching that it was almost always going to be good. Even if you didn't actually use it, simply having the option was something you wanted in your arsenal. Landorus Therian loved having it, for instance, with 3 of VGC 2015's top 8 chalk teams running it, including the champion. In 2016, the same Scrafty we mentioned as running low kick were also running knockoff, as well as Evoltal using it alongside Life Orb. And of course, when Gen 7 came around, it arguably became pretty much Incineroar's best move. Having the ultimate utility Pokemon with such strong stab, also removing items, was just so good. It lost knockoff in Gen 8, but gained Parting Shot. But then in Gen 9, they just gave it knockoff again, so it could really do it all. When Roaring Moon appeared, it delighted in spamming the move as well. Geez, Gen 6 really changed a lot, since our next high impact move is, well, Defog. The already tumultuous hazard wars of the previous generations culminated in a spike-ridden black and white that was so bad that the rules were repeatedly rewritten so Excadrill could come down in rapid spin, and even that couldn't solve the issue. In Gen 6, there was finally another move that could rid the field of these overwhelming switch punishers, Defog. It had actually been around in Gen 4, but there it was only useful for clearing the fog on Route 210 between Celestian Town and Celestic Town. In battle, it lowered your opponent's evasion and also removed the hazards you set up. Shockingly, nobody had any use for a move that undid their own hazards. In Gen 6, it still removes your hazards, but it also removes your opponents. A worthwhile price to pay in a game starving for anti-hazard options. Finally, it wasn't rapid spin or bust. And of course, even with Defog, hazards have overwhelmed many a tier. Funnily enough, at first players thought Defog meant the end of spikes, which seems quaint, but by the end of Gen 6 OU, this notion was dead and gone, as players realized just how exploitable the Defoggers were, no different from the spinners. Not only did spikes return, but the previously unthinkable of running both spikes and Defog on the same team became quite commonplace. After all, sometimes you have to spike, and sometimes you need some help against the opponents. Heck, Skarmory would often run spikes and Defog on the same set. The enormous increase in Defog distribution brought about by Ultra Sun and Moon, which gave the move to Landorus, Tornadus, and Rotom, among others, helped with the previously limited options that led to the previous hazard boom. But then Gen 9 rolls around and Goldango laughs at you. But at least in Gen 8, you have heavy duty boots as a sort of prevented Defog, should you be able to keep them away from that knockoff anyway. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Megamon VGC, Nurse Jake, Pretzel SP, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu for their major support of our videos.
And don't forget to download Raid Shadow Legends using my link to get 2 free epic champions.